I'm going to go ahead with the meeting beginning ritual.
起立，面向佛堂，参加三鞠躬、一鞠躬、再鞠躬、三鞠躬，参加各位点传世一鞠躬，开班一鞠躬，请坐下。Please be seated.
And now I want to present a slide on this particular expression. Let me have you take a look at the characters, and let me have you take a look at the pinyin romanization. So those of you who have studied the pinyin romanization system, you are able to sound it out. For those of you who haven't, let me provide some help. So these four characters sound like, this expression sounds like 法喜充满. So the second bullet there may be more helpful. 法喜充满. So four characters. Let's break them down one by one and talk about what the individual characters mean. So literally, the four characters are as follows. The first character, fa, that's the character for dharma or dharmic. And then the second character, xi, that means joy. Then we have cong, which is to fill, like fill a vessel containing liquid, as an example. And then man, the very last character means full. So when you put all four characters together, what does that mean? What does the expression mean? Well, here's the translation on that. 法喜充满 means the dharmic joy that fills your being. So this is how Chinese Mandarin-speaking people will describe a very special feeling. This is a question that came up previously. You know, when Bill was hosting at his place and also at Nate's place, I believe, they were doing the ritual, the Tao seeking, Tao transmitting initiation ritual. So at the end of that process, you know, everyone was filled with this very special feeling, this joyous feeling that was so powerful and yet unlike the joy that they had felt before. So Bill was very curious and asked, you know, is there a name for this specific feeling because it is so different? It's good, but it's very different. And I said, well, 法喜充满, this is the expression that the Chinese Tao cultivators would use to describe that feeling, so it does have like a specific name. And so, of course, he became very curious about what the characters are, how it sounds, you know, what it means. And so I want to provide some context. There are multiple ways that one can experience this dharmic joy, that one can be filled to overflowing with this dharmic joy. Well, so when would this occur? Well, number one, it occurs when you resonate deeply and powerfully with spiritual truths. So this could be something that you hear, could be something that you read, could be something that occurs to you as you think about things. But when something is resonating deeply and powerfully, it is also doing so joyously. So naturally, from that resonation, there is a happiness that you will that you cannot avoid but to feel deeply. Number two, it can occur when suddenly you have a flash of insight. When there's a concept that perhaps you had seen before, but you know at the time you weren't really in a position to get it because your mind wasn't ready yet. But then suddenly it comes to you. Or based on what someone says, you know, like in number one, suddenly in a flash you understand, and it's like it dawned on you. It's like someone switched on the light in a dark room. So that spiritual enlightenment, that brilliance, that brightness in the mind or the spirit, that causes joy as well. So that is when they will say, 法喜充满. And lastly, it can also happen when you have provided some assistance to someone else to help them find the Tao. So they themselves, the people who are seeking and finding the Tao, they may be feeling a special joy because of number 1 and 2. Now, you have another special feeling on top of that because you know that you have played a role in that journey of discovery that they're on. That's a very special feeling. That's a definite joy. So you could have 1 or 2 or 3 or all of the above experience as you cultivate the Tao, as you provide guidance, nurturing help to other people. So special experience, it's one of the most fulfilling, satisfying feelings in life. And when you know what I'm talking about, you will know that you are on the right path in your life. So that's it. 法喜充满, the 4 characters. Let's go back to chapter 81 and resume our discussion on chapter 81. So if you recall, in the previous couple of meetings, we divided up this chapter into 3 sections. And the way we do that is simply by looking at the original Chinese characters and then noting the similarities in characters, using that as a clue to separate out one section to another. And with Chinese characters, if it's a poetic line, there's going to be the same number of characters. In English, it's harder to tell because the lines may be different widths. But in Chinese, every character being the same width, it's easy to tell. So then, with the section-by-section analysis, the first one talks about true words and beautiful words. It talks about debates. It talks about the deceptive practices that people have in a debate. In section 2, which we're going to get into today, big time, is about giving and helping other people. And for that, I want to bring to you, again, another thing that ordained masters from Asia, they will talk about this, whether they practice the Tao or Buddhism. They will talk about the 3 kinds of giving very specifically and their special terminology associated with them. I realize most people probably have never been exposed to them, but if you were to study Buddhism, if you were to, for example, get involved with Tibetan Buddhism or read up on it, it's a certainty that you will come across the 3 different kinds of giving. If you talk to Tao cultivators from an Asian background, without a doubt, this will come up. So I want to make sure that you guys have this information, which is probably not available from most other sources. So as a quick reminder for everyone, previously we talked about the difference between 信言 and 美言, and that's 2 words that may not be pleasant and pleasant, soothing, beautiful words that may not be true. And we talked about how Tao cultivators would deal with each one appropriately. With the truth, it may be difficult to hear, it may be something that you don't want to hear, but you recognize that you need to hear it, and you appreciate a good friend who's a true friend for telling you exactly what the situation is without trying to, protect your feelings or gloss over it, knowing that you need to hear the truth. And then you also learn to recognize that when people try to manipulate your feelings by telling you untruths that appeal perhaps to your sense of vanity, your ego. So that's the mini summary for that. Previously, we also talked about the difference. We also talked about how people who don't know the Tao will often get into debates, but people who do know the Tao will recognize the danger inherent in debates, not the danger to other people, but danger to your own spiritual cultivation. In that first section, it all makes sort of a very nice kind of sense when you tie it all up together in a debating context. As I mentioned, the word, the character 辩, that's translated properly as debate, is often mistranslated as argument. But you can tell that it's debate because it's in debates when people are presenting their case that they use beautiful words that aren't necessarily true. Why? Well, because they want to make the case, they want to make their case as strong, as powerful, in order to defeat the other side. And they also want to appear like they know it all, like they're broadly knowledgeable. These are all deceptive practices that happens in a debate. So even in cases where debates do not devolve into conflict, like a shouting match, Tao cultivators would still prefer to not get into debate because of the inherent deception that you get into. The purpose of the debate gets twisted from seeking truth to making yourself look better by winning. So, continuing on, this is the preview on giving that we got into, and you can tell that when it comes to giving, you have to observe the principle of moderation. It's not in accordance with the Tao to give nothing, to do nothing, give nothing, because the truth is there's always something you can give, no matter what, how little that may be. There's always something you can give. It doesn't have to be a material thing. The other side of it is just as much something to watch out for, and that is to give way too much. When you give too much, it is also not in accordance with the Tao. Indeed, people may give too much as a way to signal virtue. So virtue signaling is a relatively new term that's become popular recently on the internet. It just means that you want to show off what a great person you are. That is ego-driven. So when you give too much and have it be, visible to others, then you could be trying to signal how virtuous you are. And even when you do so anonymously, so no one can know, giving too much has the negative effect of damaging your ability to continue giving. So you always want to make sure that you're in a good position, that you can keep on giving. It's not just a short-term, one-time thing, but something that you will practice for the rest of your life. And there are very specific reasons why you will want to keep that a constant, regular practice. We'll get into that in the next few slides. Moderation applies equally well to helping people, not just giving. Sometimes you're assisting them. And to do nothing is what people who study the Tao, but perhaps from sources that are not really authentic, so they will look at Wu Wei as non-action. In reality, hopefully you know by now that Wu Wei is unattached action. So actions without attachments, which sometimes can be no action at all. Sometimes can be that you are just observing how things are flowing together by themselves. And then you realize all you have to do is observe. You don't need to actually lift a finger. Now, there are other times when it requires a nudge or a gesture from you. In that case, it will be minimal action. And there's also going to be times when a certain amount of action, perhaps, much effort is required of you. That can be the minimal required in a particular situation. So that too will be unattached action. But it's too simple to simply equalize Wu Wei to doing nothing. That's not what it really means. The flip side of that is to do too much. And when you do too much, that can become wasted effort, or it can become you meddling in somebody else's business, doing too much. Maybe you mean well, you're just trying to help, but people will resent that because they sense you are interfering. So, right off the bat, we've got moderation applied to giving and moderation applied to helping. Now, I want to get into giving more deeply so you can see the Tao context, which happens to be the same as the context from Buddhism. So, there is a specific term, a specific character in Mandarin, and you see that character here. Shi. Now, pinyin is, not fantastic. So when you look at this, you may say shi. So it's close, but it's not shi. Shi is the way it sounds in Mandarin. How would I write it out if not SHI? Well, I don't really have a better way. This is the closest that we can get to in English. So shi. What does it mean? Well, it means to give, to practice generosity, and the origin of shi is Buddhism. And in Buddhism, sometimes it's combined with another character, bu. Bu shi. Now, bu, one particular character that sounds like bu is no or not. But here, it's a different character. Bu shi means to give alms to, for instance, like a Buddhist monk. So, Buddhist monks are supposed to, traditionally, Buddhist monks are supposed to live minimally with nothing to their name. So they depend on other people, the people who are not monks, to give them alms, to feed them. And they subsist on very little, and the idea is that they can do without the material world. That authentic practice is relatively rare to find nowadays. Nowadays, a lot of Buddhist monks actually live very good lives, enjoying all the good things in life. And that's straying pretty far away from the original tradition. Traditional Buddhist monks will say all they need is the Buddhist robes and the begging bowl. That's it. They need absolutely nothing else. They will go everywhere spreading the message of Buddhism, and people will see them and support them by giving them alms to support them on their way to somewhere else. So that's the origin of the term. Now, let me provide you with the Tao context, which is a little bit different from the context in Buddhism. Again, in Buddhism, it's about giving alms to monks and nuns. In the Tao context, here's what it is. Giving is far more powerful than receiving. There's a very old Taiwanese expression that essentially says that you would want your palm facing down instead of your palm facing up. What does that mean? When your palms are facing up, you are asking people for things. When your palm is facing down, you're putting something in the receiving hands. So you prefer to be the one with the palm facing down because giving is far more than receiving, far more powerful than receiving. Why is it more powerful? From the Tao context, when you give, you are emulating the all-providing, all-creating, ultimate universal source. So one way that we talk about the Tao is that, we don't know what it is exactly that gives rise to everything in existence. All we can say is that it seems to be the Tao, or the way of the universe, to continuously create, to continuously give rise, something coming out of nothing. So this never-ending source, this ultimate source, we just call it the Tao. And because we have no idea what it really is, we just know stuff comes out of it, including ourselves. Now, when you give, you are like the source. You become a mini source of things, of benefits, of help to other people. Now, the more you do this, the more you emulate it, the more you give in accordance with the Tao, the more you bring yourself into alignment with the universal source, the more you take on the attributes of the universal source, which is never-ending abundance. Now, in order to do that, in order to be in alignment with the universal source, the Tao, you have to give in accordance with the Tao. What that means is that It has nothing to do with the amount that you give. Giving more does not qualify you any better to be in alignment with the Tao. So it's not how much, and it's not the value. Maybe you're giving just a few things, but they're extremely valuable. Well, that value, that monetary value, also means nothing in terms of putting yourself into alignment with the universal source. Other things, other aspects of the giving will bring you more into alignment, and it's not the quantity, it's not the value. So I'll be very specific on what those things are as we explore this concept. Okay, so oftentimes people find the initial hurdle in this concept to be difficult to overcome. That is, the conventional mind feels if I give something to someone else, I have less of that something. The other person has more, I have less. If I keep on giving, I have less and less and less until I have nothing. That is the conventional concept. It's more mathematical. If I give something, I'm subtracting for myself. The other person, they're adding to what they have. And at some point, the subtraction on my end reaches 0. So the Tao does not conform to that conventional concept, and in observation of the world, it's never true. It's never actually true that if you were to give in accordance with the Tao that you end up with nothing. So to help people understand that better, the metaphor of the well is oftentimes used by the masters when they talk about this concept. So, how do we get to know this concept better? In this metaphor, the idea is that when you give, when you practice generosity, when you it's as if you are dipping into the well and getting water for someone else. So you can visualize how that goes. You can keep on doing it. You know, you can do it very often, and somehow, some way, hey, there's still water in the well. This particular well, it doesn't run dry. After a while, it doesn't say that's it. No more water for today. The more you get the water out, the more it replenishes itself. And now the flip side is true. If you if you have experience with the well, you know exactly what I'm talking about. If you give nothing, if you don't dip into the well and give anything to anybody, well, you come back after maybe a month or two, well, you still got water in there. But if during that month or two, you've been giving every single day to anyone who needs water, after a couple of months, there's water in there. So there's always water. It's always automatically replenishing itself. That's how giving looks like from the perspective of the ultimate source, the source of creation. Okay, so hopefully that makes it easy for everyone to understand as well. Let's move on. So when you give, there are 4 things to watch out for. You want to give with 2 particular things or attributes, and then you want to give without 2 other attributes. So when you give, you want to do so with integrity. Give that which is yours to give. I find that this is a problem sometimes when people are being generous with things that don't really belong to them. You know, they will take something that's not really theirs and be generous with that something by handing it out. While they're acting as a distribution center, they're not actually giving. They're just passing it on. So when you do that, you are not being the source. You are being a conveyance. So there's a significant difference there. Number 2, you want to give with wisdom. So one particular Buddhist master in Taiwan made the point that you always want to be very clear exactly what it is that you are doing. So for instance, when you give something and it becomes habitual, you could create a dependency so that one day when you stop giving, that person is in trouble because they were expecting something from you. It's not a gift. It's like a requirement. It's like a constant requirement that they want from you. So if they become dependent on what you give, you've created a problem. You're not really helping them. Or give something that can be misused. So the Buddhist master that I mentioned talks about how if you, acting out of the practice of generosity, give weapons to criminals, you could be causing a bigger problem. So, isn't that being generous? Isn't that being giving? Well, yeah, but you are not giving with wisdom, is the point that he's making. So, you want to give with integrity, just your own stuff, and you want to give with wisdom. You want to be very sure what you're doing is the right thing. And you want to give without forcing yourself. So if you have to talk yourself into it, I don't want to give, but I should, so maybe maybe just a little bit. Okay, well, you've already gotten off on the wrong foot. My advice, my suggestion, recommendation would be that you wait until you get it all straightened out where you feel the joy in giving and you have no compunction against giving at all. No need to force it on yourself. To force it on yourself is not in alignment with the Tao. That's a kind of striving. So no need to force it on yourself. And when you give, I would also caution you to give without discrimination based on externals. Now, when you give with wisdom, you can be understanding, cognizant of the situation. Maybe you are giving it to someone who really has the ability to get their own stuff, but you are creating a dependency, so they become lazy and complacent, and they never actually learn that lesson. I find that this is oftentimes the case, especially in the world that we inhabit. So, online, you will see occasionally people posting on websites, GoFundMe, for instance. Oh, I ran into a problem here. I have a tragedy in my family. I lost my car. I lost my home. I lost this and that. Would you please help me? Now, you have to take it case by case, but you also have to be cognizant and aware that does this person need to learn the lesson of self-sufficiency? By self-sufficiency, I don't mean that they make enough money for them to spend all the time. It's not just that. It's also whether or not they can build up a reserve for themselves. Every person is responsible for having something like that, something set aside for a rainy day. If they don't learn how to do that and you bail them out of trouble, will they ever learn the lesson that they really need to learn? So that's a consideration. But short of that, the flip side of it, number 4, is that I do also see situations where people will discriminate in their giving. So one example is, this whole idea of society being against, certain people in society being against welfare. And there's all kinds of names being hurled. Oh, welfare queens, people who are lazy and shiftless, they don't want to go out and get a job and so forth. Sometimes when you dig deeply enough, you realize that there's actually some discrimination involved. That is, it's okay for people who look like me to receive help. I can give them help because they're deserving. But then there are other people, those people, they don't deserve my help because they're not like me. They're not hardworking like me. They're lazy, so I'm not going to help them. I should give this help should not go to them. So in the Tao, there's no judgment on who deserves or not deserve your help. Do not base it on externals. They're not part of my tribe, so I'm not going to help them. That sort of thing. So there's subtleties involved when it comes to giving. Now, I want to make sure we get to this part, the three categories of 诗, and talk about what happens with each one. The first category perhaps is the easiest one to understand. 才诗. So the first character here means wealth, and the second character here is the giving or the practice of generosity. So this is all about the giving of monetary material contributions. So sometimes it's called like a donation. For instance, when you give to a nonprofit, a religious institution, etc. Now, very specifically, 才诗, this kind of giving is more about people who are desperately in need. So the expression that we have talked about before, 雪中送炭, to deliver coal in the middle of a snowstorm. That's the metaphor being used, sort of a poetic metaphor in that Chinese expression that basically says, when people are really in need, you come to their aid. So it's about that, not adding to excess, not adding on top of what is already a big pile. So in the West, sometimes we do fall into that trap. Oh, everybody is giving something to this particular charity. There's a big pile of toys for kids who can't afford to buy their own toys. I'm going to go buy some toys and throw that on top of the pile. Well, in reality, there's probably people who are in much more desperate need than the kids who don't have enough toys. So you want to apply your wisdom and your ability to your discernment to figure out the right thing to do. I can't give you like a rule. I can't give you specific guidelines for every situation. I would only suggest that you let your own wisdom, your own intuition, have that task. So that's category number one. Number two is what we call 法师. And so again, these are concepts that you will encounter if you dig deeply enough into Buddhism. So, 法, the first character means dharma or dharmic. And what that means is a religious teaching or spiritual teaching. Doesn't have to be religious at all. So when you give that, you are giving dharmic wisdom. And when you do that, you're promoting compassion, reducing the suffering in sentient beings, and more. So there are more specifics that we can get into. We may not have time to get into the specifics today, but when you provide dharmic giving, the idea is not just spiritual in nature. Sometimes it's about a skill that can become useful. So what it is that number one is material, in essence, material things, monetary things. Number two is mental, in a sense, mental and spiritual. It could be you teaching another person a skill that will become useful to them. It's the leveraging of your mind. Number three, 无为师. 无为师, this means so that there are, you can recognize probably that we have a similar character at the very end of it. So that's the giving or the practice of generosity. And then we have different characters at the beginning. We have wealth here, we have dharma here, and then we have two characters here. These two characters mean fearless or without fear. So what is the giving that's without fear? Well, it's a specific term. What it means is the giving that is courageous and proactive. So when you see, what that means is that when you see something that needs to be done, you go ahead and do it. You take action. You take the steps that are necessary. You are not spending a lot of time fearing, well, should I really do this? I'm worried if I do this, I could be offending someone, or I could be causing something to happen that I don't want. So it's the moving forward with the courage, without fear, and being very proactive. So it's about providing help to the helpless. It's providing action. That's definite. So those are the three categories, I should say, of giving. So when it comes to the first category, 才师, when you are getting to a point and understand life you get to the realization that you're not going to be able to take anything with you at the end of it. So I heard this expression from one particular person. I thought it was very humorous. He says, look, this thing called life, this existence, this reality, I can tell you one thing. None of us is getting out of it alive. We're not getting out of it alive. None of us. So when that is the case, and when you are ready to go, everything that you have accumulated, you won't be able to take anything with you. When you really understand and realize that, then you also get to the realization that, well, if I can take this with me and I have more than I need, then it makes perfect sense for me to share the wealth, share my resources with other people. Let's move on. So there's the right way to do it. There's also the wrong way to do it. The right way to do it has to do with proportionality. That is, a lot of times I hear people say, well, I can't really give. I don't really have a whole lot. So, but one day, when I'm a millionaire, then I will give a lot. So that is the opposite of the idea behind proportionality. So even when you don't have a whole lot, you can still give a certain amount that will not impact you in a negative way. So I would say the time to start giving is today, regardless of how much you possess. Number two, if you are really just giving something that you're not going to miss, then you can do so without any attachments. You won't need to set a condition on it. I will give it to you only if you are good, that sort of thing. So no attachments. Now, when you do it correctly, following these ideas, following these principles, it works. And it always works the same way. If you get to know the ordained masters in a temple, you will realize that they have all figured out this part. And what they do seems like magic, but it's not. And the way that it works is always the same. And in Chinese, I've heard the expression, 明去暗来. When it goes away, when it goes out, when resources go out, Ming is very obvious. You've written a check, you've given a present. What goes out is very apparent. What comes back is not so obvious. So it always comes back when it's done correctly as prosperity. But when it comes back, it's not obvious at all. And it comes back from sources with no discernible connection to the recipients of number one. So it's strange how it works, and it's strange that it always works. But that's proven beyond the shadow of a doubt. Not, by any theoretical construct, but just by observation of life. So I can see that we're getting close to the end of our time together today. So we're gonna have to leave the other two types for a future discussion. And as I mentioned before, there's a story that I like to tell. So for now, let me jump to the end. Well, we really didn't have enough time today. There's a lot more to talk about. So, if you are curious about the concept that I spoke of, 法喜充满, you may want to consider the spiritual path of equine cultivation. Not everybody has to get into it. It may be suitable for you if you feel a karmic affinity to it. If so, don't let anyone talk you out of it. So, if you do feel it, just let me know, and I will provide whatever help I can. Finally, some reminders, takeaways from this chapter. Number one, it's important to recognize unpleasant truths versus beautiful untruths. So, Soothing but false words often show up in daily communication as well as self-help books. So this I didn't talk about before, but it's unfortunately quite true. There will be many self-help authors out there who very surely know what you want to hear. So they will spin a lot of beautiful words into a book that sells very well, but ultimately will not be that helpful to the reader. So be careful about that. Number 2, understand the reasons why Tao sages would advise you against debates. And here's the bottom line. Anything that strokes the ego, anyone's ego, including your own ego, is bad for spiritual cultivation. So what stroking of the ego am I talking about? When someone wins at a debate, when someone scores a point against the opposition, then it's like, ooh, yes, I showed them. Wow, that was good. Great. Great job. That anything that strokes the ego in that situation, not a good thing for your spiritual cultivation. Number 3 is learn and integrate Eastern wisdom on the practice of generosity. So that's what we're talking about today, the 3 different kinds of giving. We've covered the first one, and there are 2 more to go. So next time, in our next meeting, I'll start with that, and then we will work our way into the end of the chapter that talks about contention. There's a story associated with that, and then there's the paraphrase with chapter 81.
Let's go ahead and do the meeting ending ritual, everybody. 起立，面向佛堂，持家三鞠躬，一鞠躬，再鞠躬，三鞠躬，持家各位顶传十一鞠躬，结班一鞠躬。Well done, everybody. Thank you so much.